So when things measure good with a mic in one position, it might not measure so good 6 inches that way or a foot that way or up or down. So so that was the whole goal, was to have a really uniform, cohesive sound field from the stereo speakers and with anywhere in the room, in addition to the high efficiency. So that's a lot. Sorry about that.
No, interesting. And those were the kind of things that I was thinking about, well, in layman's terms, as I was driving home on Friday with these and I was plugging them into my system. I was thinking about the different crossover point versus the DW6 and this driver rolling off at 5,000 hertz. But then as I listened, I was sitting on my phone, searching on ChatGPT for instruments and things that played above 5,000 hertz and finding there's, besides percussion and cymbals and triangle, if you look at it, piano doesn't go above 5,000 hertz. Electric guitar doesn't go above 5,000 hertz, really. Trumpet doesn't really go above, soprano sax. This primary driver from, it felt to me like 40, a little bit below hertz, to 5,000. It is doing the lion's share, more than the lion's share, of creating the music that I am hearing.
On percentages, it's probably 99%.
It was all, and it was fantastic. And instead of thinking about the tweeter, it sounded great, really dynamic and high efficient. What I became focused on, and I'd like you to tell us about this front ported. First of all, the fact that it's front ported made it really easy. I had them a foot from the wall, but there was so much bass. I'm like, this is front ported. I pulled them a foot and a half, almost 2 feet away from the wall. Didn't change it. So I was right. I'm like, it's front ported. It can't be a problem. That I was getting this wonderful bass and the vibration. But tell me about that design, because you can see it's chunky, which kind of fits with the ethos of ZU. I feel is, has sort of a chunky, efficient, powerful sound always, and dynamic. But I came away from the weekend not thinking about the tweeter or the crossover at all, and thinking about what bass these produced. And I'm going, these, if I have a sub, I'm going to use it, because if you got it, use it. But if you don't, I did not think at all that the subwoofer was required for these. So I'd love to hear you talk some about the bass reflex port.
Yeah. And how much time do you want me to spend on that?
Well, as much as you feel is valuable.
Okay. So the port placement for an audio engineer is determined a lot by the aesthetic and the size and the sonic goals as well. But you have a lot of things to balance. When I was approaching the method, I wanted sound that was first and foremost, but it had to be in a package that was truly a bookshelf. I pissed some people off with the DWX and saying, it's a mid-fat format bookshelf speaker. And people are like, dude, have you seen these? So it truly had to be a bookshelf. And I love coax because, again, you can control your sound field, like amazing with a coaxial. A kind of point source. Nothing's truly a point source.
Right.
But coax functions as if. So we had the room for a front port. If I have a tweeter here and I wanted the same size, where's my port? It's on the back.
Right.
So it's, so it could have been on the back, and then when you put it on the back too, so most engineers are going to be like, well, who cares if it's on the back? If the tuning frequency on the port is 40 hertz, that's a pretty big wavelength. And so if it's out of time a foot, a millisecond, but the phase relations is only 4 degrees, who cares? That's true. But it does affect, if you do have a 4-degree differential in timing between your main cone and your port that's on the back, you will be able to hear it, and you'll be able to measure it through in positions within the room. Not all positions, but in some positions. So having a front port, it is better in time, and then also it does the port. So the port functions, a lot of people I don't think really understand. Ports are pretty simple. The center section is mass, and it functions as, so like a radiator that has a membrane across it and then has a piece of cardboard or rubber on the front. That's just to determine its fundamental frequency. So a port in a cabinet has also a fundamental frequency in which this will vibrate to. Anybody who's played a bottle with, blowing across it knows that there's a tuning frequency, a fundamental tuning frequency. So a port or a radiator that's on the back.
Bass reflex.
Yeah, well, not a bass reflex. It was like
Oh, the passive radiator.
Passive radiators.
Passive radiator, yeah.
Sorry, I haven't used those in so long, but having a passive radiator and a port are pretty close to the same thing. They function very similarly in how you measure and how you develop and so you have a mass that's in the middle. But you don't necessarily need a big port. Isn't necessarily louder than a small port. It's a function of the tuning of the system. But a bigger port can have larger dynamic range. So depending, if you have a long pipe port, you're going to have dynamic compression much sooner than if you have a short pipe tuning. So some of the
And you said this is a short pipe?
Yeah, this is what's called a square. Depth and width are pretty close to the same. So it's a square tune.
Okay.
And that's kind of a little bit on the that's maybe outside of the DIY, but anyway, so the diameter is about a 3-inch diameter on this pipe, and then the length without the radius is about 3 inches in depth. Now the radius, this all does add to it, but the radius does reduce distortion when the velocity of your mass is high. And then it's only tuned to the point where the mass component, once the mass component is oscillating larger than the port, that's when it stops functioning. It stops coupling to your front driver. And that's when you get a 24 dB roll off. You get what mimics a 4-pole electrical filter. You get a 4-pole acoustical filter roll off when it exceeds the bandwidth of the design. So this one is designed quite low. So that you're able to get down and feel 30 hertz. Yeah, that's on the edge of its functionality. That after 30 hertz, it's kind of gone. But it'll get you down to 30 hertz because of the way we tune this port system.
So those of us that have had varieties of speakers, sometimes I look at a port, especially a rear port, and it looks to me like it's just formed around that center piece of cardboard from my paper towel.
Yeah,
hole.
Yeah.
And it's very... Okay, I have to fall on my sword. As you saw, the video ended there accidentally as I leaned forward to point out something to Sean on the bass reflex port, and I had this remote control in my lap, which as I leaned forward, it paused or stopped the recording, and I lost the last 25 minutes of my conversation with Sean. So he was super kind, and today we got together again and resumed the interview, and we went more than the 25 minutes. So this will continue now. I just wanted to explain I screwed up. It's my bad. But it also means I've got a little bit more interview to share with you in a couple more parts to the interview. So cheers. I hope you're enjoying. Sean, I think, is fascinating, super knowledgeable. I really enjoyed picking his brain a little bit. Cheers. All right, Sean, thank you very much for resuming this and giving me a mulligan on I accidentally stopped the recording. We're going to pick up on I was asking about the bass reflex port and how it is large. I think you said it's like 3-inch diameter, and you said it's square, but it's also I used the word fluted, but you said it's not accurate.
Well, flare. Yeah,
flare.
It depends on point of view.
But we had been talking about my experience over the weekend and listening to the methods, and what amazing bass for a bookshelf stand mount speaker I was hearing in my room. And so I had questions about the design of the bass reflex port. So If you could finish telling us a little bit about how you designed that and what we're getting from that.
Yeah, sure. So to basically to rob Peter to pay Paul is how a port works. So if you, in this case, we wanted to put a little more emphasis in the kick drum, and to best do that, you steal a little bit away from the sub-contra contrabass potential, and you shift it up by tuning of the cabinet, and that's what your port is doing. So it works in conjunction with cabinet volume, cabinet air volume, the cone parameters, and then the design also of the port, so that the pipe length and the mass and its behavior. The longer the pipe length in a port, the longer the group delays, you get higher distortions. It's not quite as linear as dynamic range expands. So with this, we mainly I want a bookshelf that performs at a pretty high level with efficiency and dynamic range, because
those are hallmarks of ZU audio.
Yeah,
high
right,
efficiency, high impactful dynamics.
Yeah. So I wanted a short pipe, what's called a square ratio. So your pipe diameter length is pretty close to the same, which reduces a lot of the potential for dynamic compression within the tuned system. So you can have a wider bandwidth. You have a wider dynamic range. The bandwidth is pretty much what it is. A couple of things to expand bandwidth, though, like the radius we were just talking about, that on the on the front, that as the dynamics of the air slug become increasingly large in their oscillations, that will produce distortion over the lip. So if you have a really hard edge, you get a lot of non-linear laminar flow. So you get a lot of distortion caused from the turbulence caused from those. So you can think of them like eddy lines.
Yeah, yeah.
So those eddies that develop those, and it's an alternating velocity system. So your air slug is in here just going back and forth, and so
it's like a piston.
Yeah,
right?
It's just like a piston. And then but it's also kind of more than that, in that you do have reflections that develop on the face, and on both ends of the port you have reflections, and that's partly the tuning aspect of the port is those reflective intervals, and then also how severe those reflections can be. The radius helps reduce some of the hard lines of the tuning, so you can broaden the tuning a little bit, reduce distortion a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, we wanted it to be able to have 110 dB dynamics potential if your amplifier's up to it, and 60 watt amp. Like right now, I'm running these Past Labs XA 60.8s, and those will get me to 110 dB at the listening position.
You listen average. A lot louder than I do. I am a mid 80s dB peaks when I have the house to myself and I'm listening, and a lot of times I'm really happy in between 75 and 80 dB peaks. I know
same.
You like
no,
to
same.
crank it.
No, right, but like if I'm listening to dance music, I want to feel like I can get up and dance.
Yep.
Whether my back is going to let me or not, it's a different story. But I want to have
that driving dance beat is different.
And then if I'm listening to noise music that's also has a certain sound, like there's this Polish guy, Wacław Zimpel. Holy shit. Something Oscillations is this. It's an EP. It's like 4 cuts. You can only listen to that cut loud, because less than loud, it just doesn't come off as amazing. But it's so amazing. Loud.
The inverse of that is one of the things I love about a high efficiency speaker is so often I'm listening to music that I know well, and it's at a volume level that I'm like going, where is, I know there's more in the music and I'm not getting it, and I'm turning it up, not really because I want it louder, but I turn it up until I'm hearing everything that I know is there in the recording.
Yeah.
And high efficiency speakers, like all the ZUs that I've listened to, you don't have to. You can, between 65 and 70, and certainly between 70 and 75 dB peaks, often called nighttime listening levels, you hear everything that's in the recording without having to turn it up. And I appreciate that. That's one of the things I really like about high efficiency speakers, sort of the other end.
Yeah.
Let's take this bass reflex and my how impressed I was with the bass extension and the bass produced by these speakers. Tell me some about the cabinet construction, because I think when you talk about bass, you get vibration, and that is where the cabinet construction and the bracing. Tell me how the method is built internally.
Sure, and I can throw. You might have to cut me off,
Okay.
interrupt. There's a few things I think a lot of people get hung up on. One is the rap test.
We all do that.
Yeah, right. And you can hear some qualities when you rap test a speaker, but that's not what your cone is doing to your cabinet. So the source of excitement is part of the design. So if I knew I was going to do a rap test and I wanted it to sound dead to the rap test or the knuckle test on the top, I would design it differently. So I could sell units for those people who are buy off of rap tests. But that's not, that's one thing. The other thing is, just like room acoustics, this is a question I get all the time too. Room acoustics and how you design a cabinet have some pretty big similarities. Your surface area will grow at a square, and your volume grows at a cube. So the bigger your room get, exponentially you get more reverb. It's easier to get good sound out of a small room than a big room because you have to do a lot more to overcome the volumetric spread
in a large room.
In a larger room.
I didn't know that.
And a couple other things along the same lines. Small loudspeakers have a certain sound quality for reasons, not that it's inherent, but kinda because of how we do stuff, how speakers are built and the tech we have to work with. But if you go to a punk show and the punk show is in a dive bar, it sounds like a punk show. If you go to a punk show at your local Symphony Hall, it no longer sounds like a punk show. PIL sounds great in an auditorium because they've got players, or have had, or pick your favorite punk band. But if you wanted to, if you want the piss and vinegar aspect of punk, if you want to go see Mike Watt,
it needs to be at Heebie-Jeebies in New York.
Yeah, well, right. It needs to be at a dive bar. It needs to be at a place that's got a lot of clutter, that has a low ceiling, and it doesn't have a lot of volume, and it has a lot of surface area. And punk shows sound best in that. So, bringing it back to this. So there's not a lot of bracing in a lot of our speakers. One, when you see your cone moving, cone motion is, it might as well be a meter for efficiency or the lack of efficiency. If your cone is moving a lot, that is a harmonic distortion meter. More motion, more distortion. So an ideal loudspeaker system, and the driver is part of that system, would not move at concert levels in bass frequency, because the power transfer of those wavelengths would be so complete, so little waste of energy, so that electrical energy would come into the voice coil, would go into the diaphragm or the membrane, and it would be 100% converted to acoustic sound, in which case that cone would hardly move. You would barely be able to discern it. Again, concert level, say the timpani section's going crazy, bass drum, guy on electric bass, Mike Watt's out there on his electric bass just going crazy, and the cone wouldn't move, and it would be concert level. But that's not the world we live in. So when you say high efficiency for ZU, it's high efficiency, but still we're way under 10% efficient. Way under 10% efficiency.
When you're 94 dB
and
listed efficiency.
It's a little bit complicated because efficiency also you have to take into the whole space of the area in which the waves are being propagated into. So it's kind of tricky math. Most of us just say sensitivity at a microphone position, which is a lot easier way, and it relates to our experience. But anyway, I use the word efficiency, and some have called me out for the lack of my rigor in using the word, and that is true. I use it without a lot of rigor, so I'm getting a little bit rigorous right now, just letting you know that. But so with this,
to most of us, we think 85 dB, 94 dB. We're talking efficiency, and you're putting some meat on the bone technically of what it.
Yeah,
when you use the word efficiency.
Yeah, and that's like when you so let's say it's 94 dB efficient, and that's the sound pressure level dB. So 94 dB SPL at 1 watt in or 2.8 volts. These are 8 ohm speakers, so that Ohm's law says that's 1 watt, or so it's easy we're familiar with these terms. And your microphone's 3.2808 feet, 1 meter away from the baffle face,
right.
and you get 94 dB SPL at a frequency range, and then you get to plot. But that's only at one position. It doesn't take into consideration, well, does this radiate further? How does it radiate behind? What is the radiation pattern? So it gets kind of all that stuff. So a power is a two-dimensional input. The electrical power can be modeled two-dimensionally, but acoustic is a three-dimensional. So you have this non-easy math problem to go from electrical power to acoustic power. So there's not a lot going on in here for a couple of reasons. There's not much volume in this box. So because there's lack of volume, it's inherently pretty strong. That's one of the cool things about monitor-sized speakers or bookshelf speakers, is they don't sympathetically resonate nearly as much as a bigger speaker. They require a whole lot less bracing or a whole lot less construction consideration materials. This is just 1/2-inch MDF. There are some bracing in it. There's not much bracing. The port in itself, so this is the adhesive we use in this is a polyurethane type adhesive, and that bonding and this structure reinforces this area quite well. There are also gussets in this area to reinforce and also symmetrically strengthen the driver. So those things do exist. We do have some weight at certain positions in the cabinet.
Yeah, they're 20 pounds.
They are 20 pounds.
They are substantial when you're moving them around and setting them up.
Yeah, but more than just putting a honeycomb lattice inside or some kind of a grid network inside, which can be effective, but that's not how we treat these. We wanted to give maximum sound for minimal amount of cash. So kind of a Bucky Fuller approach to most of the stuff has that kind of maximal
high value.
Yeah. But so that.
Yeah.